It is a huge honor for me today to be podcast interviewing Rick Shneyder, all the way from Milwaukee, Wisconsin. His mom and dad were Laverne and Shirley, and he grew up at a beer bottling plant. Are you old enough to remember that show?
I am.
Are you? I thought that was just an amazing show. Rick has been a banker for over 16 years, previously working at U.S. Bank. He has assisted with financing nearly 1,000 dentists nationwide. It involves everything from acquisition, startup, investment real estate, owner user real estate, operating lines, construction, and personal lending. Rick serves on several boards that include a nonprofit dental clinic that helps underprivileged children who can't afford dental care, among other local boards. Rick has assisted with Marquette Dental School's practice management course for over 5 years that includes D3 and D4 students. He graduated from the University of Wisconsin Milwaukee with a bachelor's in finance and an MBA focusing on leadership and negotiation. Rick, thanks so much for being on my show.
Thanks for having me.
There's so many, I shouldn't even have to ask you questions. You probably know all the questions to ask, but, with these dentists, they decide they're going to start their own. And their first big question is, should they buy an existing practice or should they build one?
There's an argument for both ways. Obviously, buying an existing book, my recommendation first, whether it's you're buying a dental practice or any business, is what value can you add to it, right? So the first thing is you're going to look at whatever cash flow has been coming out of the practice. You're going to look and see what adjustments need to get made. Then you have to figure out and say, all right, if I'm going to pay X amount of dollars for this business, what can I do differently to help it explode, for lack of a better term? Have they not been marketing? Do they have additional costs that they should be reducing? Are there additional procedures I can provide that the seller's been referring out? So if there is a value add play, which is really the term and sentence I was looking to get at, then yeah, absolutely buy it, because there already is a patient base. Even if you can account for some attrition, there still should be a value add play, assuming that there are those items that I previously discussed. Some people want to do things on their own. They want to start fresh. They want to hang their own shingle. It's absolutely possible to do that as well. Of course, you are paying for all the construction. You're paying for brand new equipment. You are going to float a lot of costs in the beginning, so there is a lot of risk. If you're going to hang your own shingle, just make sure that you do an accurate demographic study, that there's enough of a population base to serve, say, one dentist for 2,000 people or whatever the ratio is that's appropriate in that market, and that you've done your research on your competitors. So I don't think it's a one size fits all. I think it really depends on the research and the background studies that you've done yourself.
That is a perfect answer. Most people think binomial. It's either yes, no, left, right, up, down, and the bottom line is it's always more complicated than that. One of the things that I observe, especially with the young kids, is debt is so emotional. Like you always still hear people screaming about the United States debt, and they talk about oh my God, the United States is $17 trillion in debt, and yet the GDP of the country is just 17 trillion. It's 1 year's debt. Japan's 2 years debt, and then you say to all those people freaking out about the debt of the United States, with debt is just an instrument. You say, well, do you have debt on your house? And then you say, well, how much is your yearly income, and how much is the debt on your home? Wow, so you're 250% in debt based on your yearly GDP at home, and you're just going insane that the country is 1 year's GDP debt. And I see this in dental students where they are completely comfortable with using other people's money and graduating with several $100,000 of student loans, but then they won't go buy a practice until that's paid off. And sometimes I always wonder that, it'd be one thing to get a job at corporate and work for some big chain like Aspen or Heartland or Pacific, if you're where the 17% of the dental students with no debt, and you just get a job and it's 8 to 5 and you can be a soccer mom. But it seems like the ones that graduate the most debt, like 350, if you borrowed other people's money until you're $350,000 in debt, it seems like the only way you're going to pay that off is to go borrow another $750,000 and buy some big damn practice, because you've come this far. I don't think you're going to get out of it working at a job at corporate for $150,000 a year, paying taxes and living and all that stuff. It's kind of like if you come. So my question is, do you think if you come so far that you're $350,000 of student loans, the only way out of this mess is to go even further, all the way to $1 million under?
I mean, my gut tells me yes, because I'm a business banker and an entrepreneur in my own ways. But I mean, it's not a one size fits all. So if you don't want to take that risk, it's unfortunate. But the real answer is yes, for a few reasons. First of all, if you go and borrow, it's called $750,000 or $900,000, you're not borrowing it for 30, 40 years, whatever a student loan repayment amortization schedule is. It's only 7 to 10 years is an example, hopefully 7 years. Most dental clinics should be paid off over 7, although banks give a luxury of a little bit longer. So let's just say you make that investment over even a 10-year period, and now you have all this additional free cash flow. You could eliminate that student debt significantly quicker. You're not going to keep it that whole time period. And going back to your original statement where you said, hey, I'm making $100,000 and I have a $250,000 mortgage, or whatever the numbers were, I don't look at it as a function of how much debt you have, whether it's 300 or 3 million. It's about how much debt you can service on a monthly basis. Because at the end of the day, it's what's coming in versus what's going out. Yes, net worth is important, and a lot of doctors get very, very concerned about, hey, I'm underwater based on my home value, my student debt. But if they're bringing in, as an example, $25,000 a month, and your principal and interest payments and everything and your living expenses come out to $20,000 a month, great. It doesn't really matter how much you have today. I think the other thing that I would mention when it comes to student debt is that hopefully doctors are being educated adequately and properly on what the end game is. You want to be a dentist, you want to serve your community, you want to help people have brighter smiles, wonderful. Well, let's just make sure that you understand what you're getting into. Hopefully that's before orientation one day, or hopefully that's even during your education period. I know it's a little bit of a tangent, but I do want to make that note to say, hey, if you're going to be 350 in debt, let's make sure we understand where you're headed with that.
Back to debt being so emotional, a lot of people don't even think about trying to do this because they know they'll never qualify, and the fear of rejection and the fear of all that, they're just not even going to go there. So emotionally, talk to these kids who can qualify.
That's a really good question, and a really good statement too. So let's just look at two parts: an acquisition and a startup. So on an acquisition, 50% of it is the buyer, and the other 50% is the asset they're purchasing. Because in dental acquisitions, you are buying a stream of cash flow, and it is not a one size fits all. So I'm going to start with the seller. The first thing we're going to look at is how much money is that practice spinning off to substantiate that individual's lifestyle. So you're going to have the new practice debt, and then you have all these existing personal loans, living expenses, taxes, credit card debt, whatever. That practice may be a gold mine for somebody with little debt, and may be a tougher practice for somebody with a lot of debt. So maybe that individual has to look for a different practice. That's part one. The other part is, has that doctor done enough in production to show that it's not way over their head? So in fear of being rejected, they should look and see what makes sense for them as a clinician or as a doctor, and then what makes sense for them and their lifestyle before going to the bank, preferably, or actually before even looking deeper into that practice. So a lot of people fear getting rejected as a result of that. I would say that overall, the banking environment is fair. I wouldn't call it super loose, and I wouldn't call it super conservative. And then there's also the startup side, and the startups are usually a little bit tougher to do. I would say if they are worried about getting rejected, again, they should have the projections should match what they're capable of doing. The research that they've done in the industry as far as demographic reports, competition, should match what they're saying they're going to do. And some things that are nice for the banks is obviously make sure that there's no bankruptcies, major judgments, tax liens, things like that will prohibit them from getting financing. And things that help are outside income, like hey, I have a spouse that works and they're going to help cover my living expenses, or I may keep an associate job at 1 day a week, making $900 or $1,500 a day, whatever, something to offset the risk. Those are the things that people really fear of getting rejected with, but those are also the items that the banks look to mitigate that fear with. Hopefully that answers your question.
A lot of television advertising makes these young dental students and young dentists believe that they should stay on top of their credit score and check it all the time and all that kind of stuff. Do you want to rant about that? I mean, how real are these commercials? I mean, there's even urban mythology that if you just check your credit score, it lowers it. True or false?
If you overcheck your credit score, it will lower it. As an example, you go to a car dealership and you want to shop the best rate, and you go to 3 dealerships in a day, and that car dealership will shotgun your a credit request out to multiple lenders. That's usually the scariest thing I've seen. But somebody that checks it once a year, once every 6 months, not a big deal. To answer your original questions, credit score is important, but it's not always the determining factor on commercial financing. So remember, there's small business financing, and then there's stuff like home mortgage financing, credit card financing. And in my opinion, small business financing is something that is a little bit more liberal and subjective, because it's really up to the banker's decision to qualify for the product. It's not backed by Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, other government agencies that could play a role in stating, hey, here are the exact borderlines. So if you're in the 700s, you're usually fine for just about anything. If you're in the 600s and you're going to buy a practice, it's not the greatest, but just tell us the story. At the end of the day, a banker's role is to make sure they present your situation accurately to underwriting. And so if somebody has a 600 because, hey, they paid all their bills on time, but they went to the hospital for a freak accident and had some medical collections because they got hurt and it slipped through the cracks of the insurance company, and now this $32 bill is destroying their credit score, it doesn't mean they won't be able to get their practice. Just tell us the story. I think being forthcoming is very, very important here. So is credit score important? Yes. Is it the determining factor? No.
When you said small business a couple times, is the best loan usually an SBA loan, a small business administration loan?
I would argue no in most cases. So there are many banks out there in our country that have specialty lending programs for dentists, among other industries. If you go to a Bank of the West, Bank of America, Wells Fargo, PNC Bank, those are usually the biggest players out there as far as dental lending.
Well, say that which ones are major players?
Well, naturally, I'm going to say my company first, which I work for Bank of the West. Second, I would say Wells Fargo, Bank of America, and then there's a lot of other players involved that do this pretty well. East West Bank, PNC Bank.
And most of our listeners probably already have an account with Wells Fargo. They just don't know it.
Too soon, right?
They probably have at least 5 or 6 different accounts with Wells Fargo and still don't know it. In fact, but anyway. So the major players are your Bank of the West, Wells Fargo, Bank of America.
Yeah, I mean, I would say Bank of America and Wells Fargo do the most by volume. And they've done it for a very long time. They do a really, really good job on it. And then there's a lot of regional players that do a great job, the ones that I've listed out so far. So going back to your SBA comment/statement is, if you take a loan from the SBA, which is phenomenal for a lot of reasons, you're typically putting a down payment down. They have a little bit more red tape, and you're paying a fee directly to the government, so they can guarantee the bank, if in case something were to happen, that the bank is covered for X amount of dollars. That's the point of the SBA, is the fear of the bank having too much risk. Well, other banks, like the ones that we just discussed, have essentially put together practice lending programs that allow the banks to provide 100% financing with a lot less red tape. So, for example, you're buying a practice for $500,000, you need $100,000 for equipment, and you need $75,000 for working capital. The banks mentioned will provide all that for you without using the SBA. So if you're buying a practice, it's the number one place to start. The banks listed out, because you don't have any cash injection. You essentially have little risk on the financial side, except for you changing your lifestyle, which is obviously a huge risk. Now, in some cases, the doctor is leasing. In some cases, the doctor may own the building. In certain situations, owning the building might yield an SBA loan. Sometimes the banks may provide working capital money that can count towards your down payment on the real estate, which may or may not work. It's very situational. I think that would be a whole nother topic to discuss. But let's just say you're buying $1 million practice and a $1.5 million building to go along with it. Pretty big purchase. Normally, a bank will want 20% down, $300,000. Well, that's great, but not a lot of doctors have $300,000 when they're buying their first practice. So the SBA will come in and say, hey, you know what? We'll do this for as little as 10% down, potentially even less depending on the situation. And now you're only coming to the table with 150, but you have to do a government-backed loan, which is an SBA loan. I think it's very appropriate in that situation. And it also always depends on what the client's financial position is if they're buying the real estate. I would say if they're buying the practice, they should look to not do an SBA loan first.
Again, debt being very emotional, whether to rent or own, I think turns out to be more of an emotional question. I remember one time I was having a lunch with Dan Carney in Wichita, Kansas. He's the founder of Pizza Hut, Frank and Dan Carney, and his wife Beverly. And I said to him, I said, do you like to own your land and building for your Pizza Huts? And he said, hell no. Why would I want to own the land and buildings of 2,800 Pizza Huts spread all over the United States? He goes, that's a nightmare. He says, what they were doing. In fact, there's a company in Scottsdale, I think it's called Big Box Rental or something like that, where franchisees who have a Long John Silver's, a Pizza Hut, whatever, they'll go buy the land, the building, they'll get their business up, they'll run it for a year, and then they'll look at the numbers, and then they would buy the box from them, so they get their cash back, and then sign them, a 10-year lease to the box. So the question being, should I rent or should I buy the land and building and own because I'm just a territorial monkey and I want to own my building?
Okay, I am all pro real estate in a lot of situations, and it's not. I mean, if you're looking at the Pizza Huts, you're talking 20 locations where they want to appear less leverage on their balance sheet. That's usually the case, kind of like Walgreens does and a lot of other companies do. So I don't know if it's completely comparable to dentistry. I love the fact a dentist owns a building because when they sell the practice, it also makes it a lot more marketable. And they, you can go to like a seller or to a buyer and say, hey, not only can you buy my practice, but you could potentially buy my building. And then from an income perspective and a retirement perspective, if you're leasing, all your payments are done at the end of the day. Well, if you own your building, you could sell your practice and then you can continue getting rent payment on whatever lease you negotiate with that buyer. More so, it's not completely common for a dentist to have more than 2-3 locations on the higher end. So it's not like you're exposing yourself to a lot of commercial real estate, maybe 1 or 2, 3 locations tops. I don't think it's that hard to manage. I also think that it's better to own at the end of the day where all of your payments are coming into your pocket versus a third-party landlord. I'm not saying that leasing is bad, and there's certain situations where you're only able to lease. Like if you're in downtown Chicago, as an example, I mean, you're not going to own a building down there. But if you can own real estate, I'd say own it.
So what advice in general would you give people doing a startup?
Okay, going back to startups, my advice is, I'll start with the easiest one we already talked about is, keep your credit clean, make sure there's no collections, little things out there that you can control at a very inexpensive rate. The second thing is I would absolutely keep your credit card debt down as much as possible. The number one thing that I think banks look for when it comes to startups is liquidity. How much cash do you have in the event something goes wrong to cover expenses? So I don't know if it's a magic dollar amount because it depends on the family size and your living expenses size, but the more you can prop up in cash reserves, the better you're going to look by far. You're going to have student loans because that's how you got into the profession in the first place. You're either going to have a rent payment or you're going to have a home mortgage payment. And I think the other thing is really just tell us a story. Let us know what's going on with you on your personal side. Is there a spouse involved that's going to be helping operate the business, or somebody working if you're going to keep an associate position? And I also wouldn't necessarily shoot for the moon on everything. Bring a realistic dollar figure to the bank as to what you think you're going to really need. Make sure that your projections are reasonable and justified. So if you're going to say you're going to do 20 grand in production out the gate, how is it going to be done besides just hanging your shingle? Make sure that there's a demographic report out there. Make sure that you know your competition, not just a Google search, but are they older? Are they retiring? Is this a satellite location for them? If you're a general dentist, I mean, I've seen situations where they've done Google searches and all of a sudden the general dentists were actually orthodontists or a different specialist that aren't even competitors. So make sure you do your homework. And one thing that's important is try talking to the landlord as early as possible to make sure that there really is a lease deal there. A lot of times you'll end up, it's kind of a chicken and the egg thing. You'll want to get the financing first before you talk to the landlord, but you don't want to talk to the landlord unless you have the financing. Just do as much as you can in advance.
Let's go back to the demographic report. Supply and demand is business in 3 words. That you're a dentist, you graduated, you're a dentist, you want to supply dental services. There's got to be demand for it.
Right.
How does the average listener listening to you right now find a good demographic spot?
That's a really good question. Usually, in my experience, the doctor is either familiar with the area or has family ties to the area. It's somewhere where they or their spouse want to live in. So then they're going to draw a radius or on a map and say, all right, what's my tolerance of how far I can travel? I mean, that seems to be the most typical way, unless there's an emotional tie to a certain market. Well, there's third-party demographic companies that might charge you $250. Sometimes some of the supply companies will do it for free.
Can you name any of those demographics?
There's one company, I think his name is Scott McDonald on the East Coast, that does it for MDs, DDSs, and some other markets, maybe optometrists, veterinarians. I have to get the exact name, and I could probably send it to you.
Can you email that to me at howard@dentaltown.com?
Sure. Absolutely.
I know of another one, Real Score. Have you ever worked with Real Score?
Yeah, absolutely. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a pretty basic report. Usually what I've seen in my experience is 2,000 people per doctor seems to be a pretty common figure to look to ensure that there's enough population. I mean, there's a lot of interpretation to that number, so don't formally quote me on it, because I think it really depends on, again, who the other competitors are and if they're about to retire or whatever the situation is. So demographic reports are pretty important, because you got to make sure that you're getting into a business that can support your product line. And this is in every industry, not just dental.
Right. So when you talk about keep your credit cards clean and keep your credit card debt down, again, it's emotional. They only know their credit card debt, right. So they don't have anything to compare to. What is, when you're doing your average deal, what is the student loan debt? What is their personal credit card debt? What is the average? I mean, you've done 1,000 of these.
Yeah.
What's your average dentist? Because my homies are listening to you alone on their way to work. We do these shows an hour long because that's what their average commute is. So they're driving down the highway thinking, they don't know what to compare it to.
That's a good question. I've never formally run those figures, but I would say the average younger doctor maybe has 5,000 to 10,000 in credit card debt if they're younger, with usually a plan to eliminate it. Like, hey, I just charged X amount of money for this reason and I'm crunching it down. So again, that's going back to telling the story. And as far as student debt, every single family has a different situation, as we've talked about, but it's not abnormal to see $250,000 to $300,000, $350,000. Again, it's not necessarily the dollar amount of student loan debt. If I had 2 specialists come to me that are, say husband and wife oral surgeons, and they had $900,000 in student debt, yeah, it's a big dollar amount, but hopefully they're making enough income to support it plus some. So it's really the payments. That's the number one thing. I'd say $250,000. Going back to your question, 250 is probably average.
But see, it sounds like you personally prefer buying an existing business than all the risk of starting one from scratch.
I would say it's a much more conservative approach in any industry, especially because starting a practice from scratch, and I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it because we finance startups and I've done a tremendous amount of them and they've all been very successful. You are paying for either a book of business of an existing stream of cash flow and patients, or you are paying for the way you want your office to look and do it your own way and hire your own people from the start. There's downsides to both. Personally, I always look to acquire a practice. That's just what I would do, but I understand doing it the other way around. Maybe you've looked for a long time and then the location is too small and you can't expand, or the doctor's already doing a ton of work and all the staff's going to turn over anyway because they're all older, or you're not meshing with them well and you can't find something that's reasonably priced. I mean, there's a whole slew of reasons why you shouldn't buy a practice versus starting your own. But even if you account for some attrition of your patient base after you buy the practice, usually still it makes a lot of sense to buy it.
The demographic reports, it's a start, it's basic, but so much is in what you're buying.
Yeah.
It seems like watching dentists buy practices for 29 years, when you can go in and buy some old guy that's doing all these big filling amalgams,
Mm-hmm.
has very low skills in periodontal disease, and has all these patients on 6-month recall with gum disease for the last 10 years. I know dentists who just bought a gold mine because the older dentists had detached from continuing education for the last 10, 20 years and just
Mm-hmm.
patching up all this stuff. And they go in there and they just like double the practice overnight
Yeah.
because everyone needs to be converted to root planing and curettage and 3-month recall, and all these big patch fillings are all falling apart and needing crowns. It's just amazing. I want to ask you, you're an MBA, and in the Fortune 500 world, they're always doing mergers and acquisitions. And it
Mm-hmm.
seems to me the most underutilized thing in dentistry. It seems like whenever I meet a dentist who's doing $3 or $4 million a year, it's because they were, every time some old man retired within 5 miles of their practice, they bought that practice and rolled the charts into their existing office. And then you look at the purchase price of what they bought that practice divided by the active patients. These guys are buying new patients for $100 a head. Plus, you get the trust of the selling doctor saying, "You know what? I'm retiring, and I want you to go to Rick Shneyder, and he's just 3 miles down the road, and he sends them a really nice letter, and this is the man I want to take over my patients." What do you think M&A activity is underutilized in dentistry, or do you think it's about the same as the Fortune 500?
That's a really good question, and it differs for every market. And if you're looking at like the larger practices, like I'm in Milwaukee, we have Midwest Dental, we have the Heartlands, Aspens, and Dental Associates, as you mentioned. They pick up a lot of practices because they have private equity money behind them, so they can go to this retiring doctor and say, "Hey, I'll cut you a check for this right away, overnight, and then you're going to work for me for this dollar amount." It makes it a lot easier for a selling doctor to sell to them, which makes it tougher on putting it on the open market through a broker. I think that's the most common thing that I've seen versus like the average guy that owns a couple clinics starting to acquire everybody around him or her. I feel that if you're, say, a younger doctor, you're coming in behind some of these corporate clinics, and it's becoming more and more prevalent in most markets that I work in, that they are buying up a lot of these. But a lot of sellers are also a little bit emotional in the fact that they don't want to see it go to corporate dentistry. They want to see kids out of school that they want to hand it off to them, and they want it run for the next 30 years the way that they ran it. So that's the flip side to a lot of these guys that are selling and saying, "Hey, I'd rather give it to this girl out of school or this guy, a couple years out of school than seeing it go corporate because I want my patients to receive the same care that I gave them for all these years."
That's really the what you just said. The a big jest, powerhouse, wind in their tail of corporate dentistry is just a big fat line of credit providing liquidity to selling doctors. I mean,
Yeah.
that's driving them more than anything. It's not starting practices from scratch, de novo, and building up a profitable business, spinning off cash. Because if that was the case, they'd be publicly traded. So my question
Right.
to you as an MBA: why is there not a single corporate dental chain in the United States on the Nasdaq?
That's a fantastic question. I have no idea.
Be,
I
be,
I have never even looked into that.
well, you know, you want to. I mean, imagine you're on Shark Tank.
Yeah.
Imagine. You said in Milwaukee. Who's in Milwaukee? Which corporates are in Milwaukee?
I mean, there's Heartland, there's Midwest Dental is the one that comes to mind right away. There's Dental Associates, there's Aspen, there's RLJ, there's
So imagine
Forward.
all. In fact, that's what I want to do. I one of my dream fantasies is to do an episode of Shark Tank where you get
Yeah.
the CEOs of the top, corporate dentist chains to go into the Shark Tank and try to get a shark to invest in their company. I mean, what are they going to say? Oh, well, for my company to increase sales $1 million, I need to borrow $1 million of debt to go buy an existing practice. And then if we want to go to 2 million, I need to come back to you, get another million, and then go buy another practice for $1 million. Now we'll be 2 million in debt. And we'll just keep doing that until we're $1 billion in debt. I mean, imagine what the sharks would say to that.
Yeah.
I
Right.
mean, and if they were just de novo starting practices, building them, and they were spitting off excess cash of up and beyond the 14% that corporate usually takes, and then have all this leftover money for the Wall Street, they'd all be publicly traded, and not one of them is. I'll stay behind this until I say otherwise. Corporate is just liquidity for old selling, fat, short, bald dentists like me. And until one of them makes it on the Nasdaq, they don't have my attention.
Yeah, agreed.
But I mean, but again, these I just don't understand why you always see dentists like your age. Okay, so so I see a dentist like you, your age, and you're in a town of four dentists. So the old man, you know, north, south, east, and west, a town of 4,000, and the old man across town is going to sell his practice. Okay, so if you don't buy it, he's going to sell it to some young, hot, energetic person who's going to work their butt off, or you can buy it, eliminate a competitor, buy all those charts, roll them all into your office, and drop from 4 dentists in that town to 3. I mean, what do you want? You really want to be 55 years old and see some 25-year-old person who sleeps 3 hours a night and is just ready to eat, live, breathe, and die dentistry and go to all the schools and just do everything that people in their 20s and 30s have the energy to do? You want to compete with that because you wouldn't buy old man McGregor's dental farm? And the ones who see that and the ones who get it and the ones who do that, by the time they're 65, their practice is doing $4 million a year. So
That's
much
right.
by mergers and acquisitions. Here's another question: when these dentists are buying, one of the biggest controversy, emotional decisions is, let's say you come in and you buy my dental practice. Should I stay or should I go? It goes back to the song by The Clash. When you're advising a dentist and he's going to buy old man McGregor's dental practice, what if old man McGregor says, you know what, when you give me the check, I'm giving you the keys and I'm out of here, versus I
Oh,
should stay on?
there are so many arguments to this both ways. This is not an easy answer, okay?
Right.
So here's the deal. If the seller remains, there is a school of thought where the attrition will be a lot less because he's still there to hold your hand through every single patient and say, well, I've known Judy for years and this is what Judy knows. And a buyer may feel more comfortable because they feel like they have a little bit of skin in the game since they're a consultant or they're going to be an associate for the practice. So there's those benefits. The employees may feel less likely to move around as well. So there are some benefits that way. On the flip side, if they're there, all the employees are still going to them because the seller still thinks he or she are the boss. They're still in your way. There may not be room for them, even though you may want them there. you may want to just cut ties and say, hey, we're done. I'm going to do this my way because I don't want it to be uncomfortable with any other employees. I don't want to step on your toes. You don't want to step on my toes. I'm already prepared, to implement all these other procedures and things like that. Plus, if the seller stays on, he may not want to see a lot of the changes made. Maybe he or she have not been marketing. Maybe they haven't, updated their equipment or gone digital or whatever. And all of a sudden, all these changes are being made. Kind of, not saying it makes them look bad, but maybe a little bit uncomfortable for the seller. So, I mean, I get it. Some people want some hand holding on the transition. I think being done is okay. I think it's fine.
So talk about your bank, Bank of the West. It's a 135-year-old bank. What if you're having people listen to you from all 50 states. What states? How much of the U.S. do you guys cover?
We're in about 20 states right now, and we are owned by BNP Paribas out of Paris, France. And our local headquarters is in San Francisco for Bank of the West. So a few of us were brought on earlier this year to basically run the practice program, which the primary focus is dental. Bank of the West has some phenomenal competitive advantages. In addition to the practice program, they have 20-year fix on owner user real estate loans that are non-SBA, which is very, very hard to come across. Very well-run organization, very lean, great management, great leadership, very supportive of anything we've needed thus far. So while it's a new bank to me, it's to me as an employee, it's not new to me when I was a competitor working for US Bank for many years. Phenomenal organization.
And how do my homies contact you if they got some of these banking questions?
Best way is I'm going to go old school on my cell phone and say 414-617-6120. Again, 414-617-6120. And my email address is rick.shneyder@bankofthewest.com. And obviously my last name is spelled a little goofy. It's S as in Sam, H as in Henry, N as in Nancy, E, Y, D as in David, E, R. Again, rick.shneyder@bankofthewest.com.
And do they have to be in one of those 20 states to use Bank of the West?
We prefer for practice lending to be within our market, but we always make exceptions for what we call out of footprint lending, like all the other banks do.
And what is your a lot of them? Are you afraid of? Is it fear of success? Is it greed? Is it greed or fear? The Greeks said we only had two emotions: greed and fear. What is your default rate look like? I mean, if you approve some kid for a loan and they're thinking maybe I shouldn't do this, maybe I shouldn't do this. If you approved it and the whole deal went through, what does the default rate look for you guys?
It's less than 0.5%.
I mean, why is it? Explain to them why it's so low.
I mean, everybody needs dentistry. And at the end of the day, dentists' sources of income are very, very high. And if something were to happen to the practice that they weren't aware of, they can go and replace their income somewhere else at a six-figure job easily. So, you're looking at loans that are amortized over 7 to 10 years. If you're buying a stream of cash flow, there's already money coming in the door. Obviously, that's why the startups are looked at a little bit differently. And if people's teeth hurt, they go in and pay whatever it takes to get it done. And most people are carrying insurance that the dentist already accepts.
Yeah, I mean, walk up to any woman in the United States, any woman from any economic background, say, how much cash do I have to give you to extract your front tooth and you can never replace it the rest of your life? And the poorest of the poorest women who are getting on the bus to go for a minimum wage job will not take $1 million cash for that. I mean, that's the beauty of dentistry. Yeah. I mean, it's amazing. And then once your mouth hurts, the joys of your life of eating, talking, swallowing, all those things just come to a screeching halt. So you're pretty heavily involved with Marquette Dental School. So, it's been 29 years since I've graduated from dental school, but when you're in those dental school class and it's filled with all these millennials, where do you think their head and psyche is? How many of the class do you think, in their perfect world and a long enough view, want to own their own dental office and be their own dentist? Versus what percent of them are you think they're thinking, I don't ever want to do that. I would never want to do that. I want to just go and get a job.
That's a really good question. It's been about a year since I've spoken in there, but over the years, what I've noticed first is that I only see the backs of laptops when I speak, and this is towards the the end of their D3 or D4 semester, so I'm in there more as a formality for them. Usually there's 70 to 80 students in the class, and I would say that I can pick out 10% of them really paying attention. And those ones will contact me within 6 months. And then there's another 10% that say, I stumbled across your information. I don't remember what you talked about, but I remember it was important at the time. I'd like to talk to you about my situation. That's like another 10%. So 20 to 25% are, are wanting to be entrepreneurs in some way, whether it's a startup or an acquisition. It could be more, but that's just the feedback that I get directly.
And do you have a stand back time to be eligible after graduation? I mean, is there like you have to be out of school 1 year or 2 years, or do you have any requirements like that?
We prefer it to be two, although in some cases it's less. I mean, everybody has a different situation on why they feel that they can handle the production or handle the projections. Look, banks have policies, right? But policies always have exceptions to them. There's a box that bankers always want you to fit in. But if you're outside of that, just help us understand why. Because at the end of the day, if something were to go wrong and we wrote a loan, we just need to show the justification and the mitigants to that situation. So going back to production, you could say, well, yeah, well, I've watched my dad practice and been in the operating room with him for all these years, and or in my first year I worked for corporate and I did 600,000 in production. So buying this practice for 500,000 is not a big deal. Tell us the story.
Of those 0.5% that fail, why are those dentists failing?
I have to be honest, I've actually never had one fail. That's just the statistic. A lot of times it's they are doing well and they'll invest their money into something unrelated to dentistry. Like they get into some business. I'm making up an example of say, them and their buddy bought a car dealership and they put everything on the line for it. I don't know. It's an extreme example, but that's one. Another one would be they overbuild. They buy, say they put 800 grand into a startup or something crazy like that, and there's maybe 3 ops. Again, it's an extreme example. One other thing could be they keep buying too many toys, too many pieces of equipment, and have debt everywhere, and then the equipment is not giving them their return on investment. And then there could be other reasons like I actually have seen one. It wasn't a client of mine, but an individual bought a practice that had a fraudulent amount of patients. They weren't all active patients. They didn't check the books well. There wasn't a bank involved in the deal to do a lot of cross checks. So you need to make sure that you're really looking for all those potential fraud situations and having the right professionals help you review them. And then obviously personal or business divorce could affect a practice as well. So those are the only reasons.
So in summary, what you just said is don't get married. I heard you loud and clear. It's in 2008, I was amazed at how many of my friends and dentist colleagues around here that went under because they started something like that, bought like a 20-acre parcel of land and were gonna be a developer.
Yep.
I'm like, dude, you went from nothing to now you're a developer, and you got a loan for that many millions of dollars, and then the market tanked. And I want to tell you another thing that I've noticed. You really have an advantage being a dentist, a physician, or a lawyer at calling the tops of these markets, because when it's at the top and all the smart money won't touch it, you start getting phone calls and pink messages of somebody selling soybean futures or a real estate parcel, and you start hearing terms like it's a no-brainer, this land, and when I start getting flooded with all these brokers calling me trying to sell stuff, I know the smart money won't touch it, and now they're phone dialing dumb dentists and physicians and lawyers who have a 6-figure job sitting on a bunch of cash, and it's a huge part of my mental walnut brain of calling a top in the market. I mean, there's a lot of tops that I've seen several times. One of them is that if you list out the 220 countries and you list out their GDPs, and then you start seeing that these the top stocks, they don't do anything for your family. They don't feed you. They don't clothe you. They don't shelter you. They don't raise your child. There no shoes, cars, nothing. It's like right now, like Facebook, Google, all these things that I managed to live for 35 or 40 years without having any of it. Those are all your biggest market caps. And then if those stocks were to double one more time, now their market caps are like the GDP of Italy. And if you've ever been to Italy, they have like 75 million real people in real towns like Rome and Venice, and they have lots of people, having babies. And I mean, you really think a gosh darn app on your cell phone is worth Italy? And then you start having you just start seeing then the next I start seeing is the cutbacks on common ordinary people eating out for lunch. They start taking a sandwich and a lunch pail, or they downgrade from eating out a $7, $10 lunch at Applebee's down to a $1 taco and Coke at Taco Bell. So you start seeing inferior products take off, like lunch and Taco Bell, not a $7, $8 hamburger at Applebee's. And there's just a lot of toss. But if you're a dentist out there, when somebody is calling you and has the best darn investment for you, not only are they chasing dumb money because they can't get any Wall Street person to listen to them, they're preying on it. It's predatory behavior. As the predatory behavior ramps up, there's about to be a correction. I mean, I know that people say you can't call a correction or anything like that, but there's a lot of variables in that soup. I want to ask you another question. You and I both, after college, decided to go back and get their MBA. I did mine. I did the evening program in 98, 99, where every Monday and Wednesday from 6 to 10, I went. It was 200 of us, and it was 6 trimesters over 2 years. So every trimester we'd have 2 courses, one from 6 to 8, one from 8 to 10. I thought it was the coolest damn thing I ever did in my life. I had so much fun. When dental school was over, I almost got on my hands and knees and kissed the ground and cried that it was over. I imagine it was the same feeling that you just came back to your country from war or something like that. But when MBA school was over, I drove home and my heart was sad. I mean, just sitting there after work and listening to all these great business stories and on all these great companies, on managerial finance. So my question to you is, do you think it's worth the time of dentists to go back to night school or the Saturday executive program? We just go every Saturday and get their MBA. Do you think it's overkill, or do you think it'll be a great move? What was your experience with your MBA?
That's a fantastic question. So I want to tell you why I did my MBA in the first place. I wanted to be in middle management and in executive management. That was what I thought I wanted to do. But I decided to, be some of the boots on the ground and work directly with small business owners. And my aspirations are not to move up. So a lot of people do an MBA because they work for corporate. I mean, it's very, very common. I'm not saying everybody. I'll get to your general question in a second. But I don't regret any of it because of the people that I met in there and because of some of the topics that I learned. Well, actually, marketing was some of my favorite in there. But my parents always said to me, there's 2 things that nobody could take away from you. 1 are your travel experiences, and 2 is your education. Once it's done, it's done. And I feel that when you go and do an MBA program, for whatever reason it is, maybe you're a solo dentist and you just want to learn how to operate your business better. I would say it's fantastic for it, and you want to be a better leader to your staff. There's nothing wrong with it. It's great. Yeah, it's tough. I did mine at night as well, just like you did. So I, worked till 5:30, and I drive there from 6 to 9. And I was exhausted. Came home and did homework, but it's done. And I met some phenomenal people in there. And I'll tell you the truth is that I feel that I learned an equal amount from my professors as I did from my peers. There are a lot of people in there that are very smart, that are very connected, that become lifelong friends of yours. And I'd say from that point alone, it was absolutely worth it. And if you're an entrepreneur, you're going to run an even better organization. It's not that you're going to come in there and just cut all your staff and cut all your expenses. You might learn how to drive people to help produce more. You might learn how to acquire your next practice better. You might do an MBA because you want to do it before you do a startup, so you can actually run a successful operation. There's a whole slew of reasons for it. My reason ended up being one that I didn't pursue, but I'm glad I did it because I have a lot of friendships and business partnerships as a result of it. So hopefully that answers your question.
Your mom said that they can't take away what? The two things: travel experiences and education?
Yeah.
I'd like to add hepatitis C to that list. Uh, but no, what I did is that was 98, 99. That's when computers, laptops were just coming
Yeah.
out, the Dell and all that stuff. And I took my laptop, and whenever, the lecture, and applied to my dental office, I was taking notes. And then when I was done, one of the biggest programs out there was Tony Robbins' 30-day personal power. So I looked at all those notes and I said, my God, I don't know if I could even go over those notes in 30 hours, but I did. And I called it the 30-day dental MBA, and it's free on iTunes and it's free on YouTube. It's free on Dental Town, but it was my notes. And what I'm most amazed is that was in 98, 99, and now it's 2016, and everybody's comment is the same. They're saying, yeah, some of those companies are gone or changed or whatever, but the essence of the MBA, it's just timeless. I mean, it's kind of like math and geometry,
Yeah.
physics. I mean, what's really going to change on the fundamentals of marketing and finance and accounting and leadership? And I thought it was the biggest game changer for me ever.
Yeah.
But if you're wondering if you should take the 30-day MBA, go to iTunes or YouTube and listen to my 30-day MBA from back in the day, and that'll either wet your whistle or give you enough of what you want into it. Where do you, when you're talking to dentists, and go back to your MBA program, they've had 8 years of college, math, geometry, calculus, physics. They've mastered every skill that you're never going to use in your entire life. I mean, I'm still 29 years out of school, and I've never had to use geometry, trig, calculus, the Krebs cycle. I mean, it was just all almost overkill. Where do you think they're weakest in?
Probably basic accounting. Basic profit and loss accounting.
And that's a hard course.
Yeah.
Accounting's an ass-kicking course. I mean, you talk to students going to ASU, they say accounting 101 almost killed them.
Yeah. Yeah, it's probably true. But I mean, it's really important. And like you said, it's timeless. I mean, money coming in versus money going out. At the end of the day, no matter how good of a dentist you are, if you're not managing your bottom line and managing your expenses, you're not going to have a business. And as much as you want to be a great person to the community and a great person to your staff, you have to keep the lights on and the doors open. So, and if you don't know, I mean, yes, you can trust your accountant to a certain extent, but you absolutely have to know enough to be dangerous.
Yeah, and just like dentists are one of the few people in their town that know the difference between geometry and trig, I'll give you a pop quiz right now to my listeners. If you don't know the difference between managerial accounting and financial accounting, you don't understand accounting. If you can't sit there and tell me what's on a statement of income, your profit and loss, versus a statement of cash flow versus a balance sheet, you're weak. So I want to flip that question on you. Which area of your MBA do you think dentists are the most overconfident, where they think they know more than they do, where they think, oh, I'm really good in this sector, and you're listening to them talk and you're thinking, maybe not?
Really good question. I'll probably point to some of the leadership classes because leadership is very psychology driven, and a lot of doctors I see want it run their way, but never really look to the employees from the employee standpoint. It's really interesting to figure out, okay, what's their goal? What's my goal? How do we make this work? I feel that that's an area that really teaches you a lot about yourself and how you handle certain situations. And it taught me a lot about myself. So I think that a lot of people have a hard time with it. It seemed a little bit easy in the beginning, but once you really get into it, I mean, you learn a lot about how to work with different people.
I agree that leadership is amazing. And the other thing I think they're overconfident in is marketing. Because, even the smartest marketing people in the universe will tell you they don't even, when they look at their marketing portfolio, they don't even know which half is working half the time, and don't know. I mean, when you see a USA Today and you see a full page ad and all it is an iPhone or an Apple. I mean, how the hell would iPhone know if that worked or not? or the signage on your dental office that you put, a big lit sign and a monument sign, or a billboard. I mean, and a lot of people, even the stuff they measure, they don't even understand. Like they'll say, "Oh yeah, I did a banner ad and I didn't get that many clicks." Yeah, but how many people saw the banner ad and thought, "Oh, I need to look into
Right.
that," or I mean, marketing is so. You could literally say it's half voodoo.
Yeah, probably.
And then I also want to add that when it comes to failures, in 2008 there was the big financial meltdown. I saw a lot of dentists who had got into real estate development, construction, big leverage loans that all these other developers were trying to get rid of, and they were lucky to find all these rich dentists and endodontists who are still doing molar root canals this morning to pay down that debt so they didn't have to do a BK bankruptcy. But I would say the majority of the failures I've seen in 29 years is when they lost their license, and the things that you lose your license for, you get caught with addiction and you don't go to treatment. You tell them to go to hell, or criminal behavior. I mean, there's always that element of some weird, wild behavior, and you lose your dental license. And if you lose your dental license, I want a cold reminder to all you homies that, you guys that think that dentistry isn't a very good job because you only make $174,000 a year on average. Rick, tell them, how easy is it for a dentist to shred his license and go get a job for $174,000 a year outside of dentistry?
It's almost impossible. I mean, I don't know where you can find that.
I know. And they're always complaining, I did all this and the average dentist only makes 175. Dude, you can't go get on monsterjobs.com and start doing a search for job openings that pay 175.
Yeah,
There's
right,
not any. I mean, you're
right.
basically, if you lose your dental license and you have to make $175,000 a year, you better start watching past episodes of Breaking Bad and learning how to make drugs in your kitchen, because I don't know how they could do it. I mean, they really don't know how good they've got it.
Yes.
And when they say they have the most stressful job in the world, it's like, really? I'm pretty sure a soldier in Afghanistan or Iraq would disagree. I'm pretty sure your average policeman would disagree. I'm sure the average fireman walking into a building on fire would disagree. It's really a good job. So, Rick, this is an area where, dentists, I know my homies, and they just want to learn, they're like a chef. They just want to learn a new recipe. They want to make lasagna. They're dentists. Man, you show them a root canal course or an implant course or a bone grafting course, and they're just drooling all over their shirt.
Sure.
And I'm trying to force feed them the business side, and it's not what they want to listen to. And I'm so thankful that you came on my show today and made them think about the business of dentistry. I hope a lot of them go listen to my 30-day dental MBA on iTunes or YouTube, and hopefully that'll won't quench your thirst. Hopefully that'll just whet your thirst to go back and get your MBA. I think, like you said, travel experiences and education, two things that can't take it away. Whenever I lecture overseas, I got four boys. I always take at least two of my four boys with me. I try to take them all, because just getting out of America and seeing Indonesia, Malaysia, South Africa, Paris, London, all these places, it really makes you think, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I feel
Yeah.
the exact same way.
Well, thanks so much, buddy, for coming on my show.
Good
And you can
for having me.
contact Rick at 414-617-6120, or email him rick.shneyder, SHNEYDER, at bankofthewest.com. Have a rockin' hot day, Rick.
You as well.